Now, it is a pleasure to welcome today Associate Professor Rachel Nyagondwe Fiedler from the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Mzuzu University, where she has been teaching since 2008. Professor Nyagondwe Fiedler's academic career began with studies at the University of Malawi's Bunda College of Agriculture, where she earned a diploma in agriculture in 1986. She then went on to take a University Certificate of Education, UCE, from Chancellor College, University of Malawi, right here in Zomba in 1994. This was followed by a Bachelor of Theology from Canberra College of Theology in Australia in 1998. Moving on to postgraduate studies, Rachel graduated with a master's degree in Theology and Religious Studies from the University of Malawi Chancellor College in 2001. And finally, she was awarded a PhD in Church History and Polity from the University of the Free State, Bloemfontein, South Africa, in 2011. Professor Nyagondwe Fiedler has been a significant contributor to the development of Mzuzu University as a relatively new university in this country, founded in 1999. She has done much work on curriculum development and interdisciplinary research. An important piece of work that is relevant to today's topic is that she was the leader of a team that produced the Mzuzu University gender policy and developed a curriculum for a university-wide program on gender and development studies to be offered to first-year undergraduate students. She has also been contributing to theology at both Malawian and African levels. Her first book, Women of Bible and Culture, Baptist Convention Women in Southern Malawi, published in 2006, was significant in opening up the subject of the role of women in Malawi's church life, something that was often neglected in the earlier historiography. Then, the history of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, published in 2016, is a well-received account of the contribution of women to African theology over the past 30 years or so. Meanwhile, there have been many other research projects and publications, often completed in collaboration with others. Today, Professor Nyagondwe Fiedler will be addressing us in English, but she is also fluent in Chitumbuka and Chichewa, which helps a lot when conducting research in local contexts in Malawi. Currently, she is on a well-earned sabbatical leave from the university, but we're very grateful that she's taken time out from the sabbatical to prepare and present this seminar for us today. So Rachel, on behalf of the people who are present here in Zomba and also those who are joining from other places around Malawi and around the world, let us all bid you welcome and ask you to feel very free in making this presentation.
I'm Rachel Nyagondwe Fiedler, Associate Professor of Theology and Religious Studies at Mzuzu University. And I am glad that I'm invited to this research seminar, which is hosted by Zomba Theological College today, the 30th of September, 2020. My topic is gender-based violence in Marawi, a theological perspective. I want to begin by defining the word gender-based violence. Gender-based violence in this presentation is going to use a word known as Nkhanza, which is based on the research which was conducted by Sewode White, when she was researching on the plight of widows in Marawi, and discovered that dispossession to treatment gender-based violence, research has pinpointed patriarchy as the causative agent. And this, from the start, I should state that patriarchy is not men. It is a system of ideologies and practices that aim at favoring men and boys. This definition implies that only women and girls could suffer GBV. Inasmuch as they are the most hit by the vice, we see that GBV is not only limited to them, but also some men and boys do suffer GBV. And as such, it is clear that we must use another paradigm to marry the word patriarchy to understand Nkhanza. And the word which I'm going to use is borrowed from Elizabeth Fiorenza, and the word is Kyriake. Kyriake is a word referring to kingship. In layman's language, maybe I should say dominance, which means that any kind of dominance has the potential to perpetrate gender-based violence to others. And in Marawi, authority is one of the factors that has been identified as promoting GBV. And authority in Marawi is not only linked to kingship, but also some other factors. And one of the major factors is the earning power of an individual. And earning power is the power that is linked to opportunities to access education and businesses that will enable somebody to earn money. And unfortunately, in Malawi, is the highest population of women and girls do not have that privilege. As such, since harmful cultural practices and wrong interpretations of scripture promote GBV, they are usually powerless to resist such cultural practices. And it is therefore understood that it is not their femaleness as such that renders them to be victims of GBV, but it is because they are powerless, they do not have authority, because the access to means of gaining that authority is not always available to them. What is my main argument in this presentation? My main argument is that gender-based violence is an issue that is part and parcel of the business of religion, including the church. This is because GBV occurs even among members of our churches. I had a dialogue with Professor Kenneth Ross, and in this dialogue, he actually agreed to my proposition. But the different evils that GBV brings on humanity are against the liberating motive of the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ on humanity. I then argue that theologians, especially theological educators, are in a position to offer solutions that would significantly contribute to ending GBV in church and society in Marawi. My theoretical framework. In this presentation, I utilize a gender framework based on theories of African feminist theologians as regards gender justice, which is in this framework is understood as a good to be equally celebrated by both women and men in church and society. I also combine this perspective with the human rights theory expounded by perspectives enshrined in the Malawi legal frameworks and all frameworks to which the government of Malawi is signatory. There are three aspects of the framework which I want to bring to our attention. Firstly, GBV compromises the dignity of human beings and is opposed to God's creation motive. GBV also is against the spirit of God's creation, that he created men and women as equal in his image. As such, it is the mission of the church to restore people's dignity and equality by preventing and mitigating GBV in the world. This is a key perspective of liberation theology and pastoral theology. Secondly, Christians ought to be good citizens of their land, and to achieve this, they must promote the rule of law, especially laws that do not compromise their faith. Some forms of GBV are against the laws of Malawi, and therefore a good citizen must participate in the fight against GBV. Thirdly, the Bible is the word of God, but often the word has been compromised through wrong interpretations. Similarly, contextualization is part and parcel of African Christianity, but must promote cultural interpretations that prevent and mitigate GBV in church and society. Information for this presentation is gained from my own research and that of students I have supervised at Mzuzu University, both at undergraduate level and postgraduate level since 2015 especially. I also utilize my own lived experiences with the vice where possible. My lived experience illuminates how I imagine a practical theology that could overcome the vice in Marawi. As a theologian, my expertise are in the area of church history and church and gender studies. I'm also a member of the circle. Thus, my presentation is guided by my named theological expertise. The beginnings of GBV discourses in Malawi academic institutions. One of the earliest researches on gender-based violence was done by Isabel Apao-Piri in the early 1990s. Then she was lecturing in theology and religious studies at the University of Marawi. She's now currently at the helm of WCC as deputy general secretary, and is based in Geneva, Switzerland. During this time, Isabel Apao-Piri began by challenging women in Malawi to research and write on the theme violence against women. As such, research was conducted under her leadership on rape and sexual harassment in education institutions, taking Chancellor College as a case study. And she did that research in conjunction with three other colleagues, Linda Semu, Flora Nankuni, and Nyovani Madisi. They presented their paper at the University of Marawi Research Dissemination Conference in 1995. And what transpired was that Isabel Apao-Piri was attacked verbally by some agents within the academic community at Chancellor College, and in addition, her house was damaged. The Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians was formed in 1989 in Accra, but was brought to Malawi by Isabel Apao-Piri while she was lecturer there at Chancellor College. Constraints of the dialogue. What happened for the dialogue not to take prominence in academic institutions in Malawi? The main reason is that Malawi was not connected to global avenues where such discourses were taking place. And here I'm mainly taking in mind World Council of Churches and ITWOT, and also the 1979 to 1986 decade of women. Such global movements were not well known in Malawi because of the restrictions that were there. Malawi lacked exposure to outside world where such issues were discussed freely, and this was systematically done through restricting movements of Malawians globally with the intention of restricting them to associate with movements such as this. So before the 1993 referendum, when Malawi agitated for democracy in Malawi, it was really dangerous to get involved in the movement that was connected to liberation. It was not only this factor of lack of contact to global movements that promoted gender discourses, but there were also local factors. And some of them are this. We had few theologians in gender-related training. There were also few members of the circle and members of ITWOT, because these two fora were very key in pioneering gender research in academic institutions. We also had the conservative theology spearheaded by some theological institutions, especially church-based institutions. We also had the issue with our culture, very conservative in nature, and gender issues became a discourse that was it was a taboo. And lastly, the issue of access to information bill to safeguard freedom of expression, although it was enacted in 2016, its authorization did not take place in good time. Of course, under Chakwera now, there is that sign of hope that it is going to be operationalized. However, I hear that there are still some agents fighting against this. After multi-party democracy, it is true that Marawi enjoyed some increased freedoms, and in this environment, it was easier to push forward the gender discourses. In Malawi, some forms of gender-based violences have been criminalized, and during this dispensation, Malawians are able to access justice through justice delivery structures such as courts, the police, victim support units, one-stop centers, and the chiefs. Regardless of such provisions, many perpetrators of GBV are not punished by law. This is because of many reasons. Some present their GBV issues to structures that are more likely not to incriminate the offenders. Among such softer structures are the Nkoswe, traditional marriage counselors, the chief, and religious institutions such as our churches. While chiefs might give softer punishments, the church and marriage counselors often center on advising the perpetrators to change their ways. Further, research has shown that corruption, cultural and religious teachings have contributed to perpetrators escaping punishment. A theological reflection should therefore center on the role of the church in dealing with perpetrators of GBV that need to be punished by law. Africans, from the start, when we are wanting to look at acts of gender-based violence, we need to know that Africans are not always dealing with the same cultures that promote gender-based violence. For example, in East Africa, the issue of female genital mutilation is the key there. And we know that there has, according to the research by Nyambura Njoroge, the resistance was made against this kind of cultural element that brought violence to the women. In West Africa, we have the issues of fistula among women, which are very common there. But although there are also instances here in Malawi, because of differences in the initiation rights among women, here we only experience lesser forms. But of course, when we look at research which has been done in South Africa, especially I quote my own Isabel Apao Piri, Malawian, did research in South Africa and also found that in Africa, violence against women, especially issues of rape and virginity, were connected to beliefs. And this is also very similar to what we are struggling with in Marawi. And in this presentation, I want to highlight some of the acts of GBV that are more connected to Marawi. I want to look at GBV Malawi. Malawians, they really like to go through rituals. I can say even Africans. Some communities actually would even dissociate themselves from someone if he or she has not undergone a certain ritual connected to certain critical stages in one's life. It is the same in Marawi. The missionaries that came to Marawi had to confront this reality head on. When Christianity began in 1875 with the arrival of Scottish missionaries at Cape Macleay, literature shows that missionaries were often blamed for demonizing the African culture, and particularly it was because they challenged initiation rites. And indeed, missionaries at that time would discipline parents if they took their children to traditional initiation rites. According to Felix Chingota, J.C. Chakanza, working on the Catholic Church, this was common. And within the Catholic Church, discipline meant to ban the members from participating in sacraments. And there were more research in that area. And because of that confrontation that the church had with the locals, there was the move to Christianize initiation rites. And currently, we know that there is actual research by Isabel Apao Piri documenting Ulangizi sessions in Ngoma Synod, and Rachel Banda, who is presenting Christianized initiation among Baptist women in southern Malawi. More Longwe wrote on Ulangizi in Baptist Church of Central Malawi. And there are many researchers that have looked at Christianized initiation rites. However, these Christianized initiation rites still promote mild forms of GBV in as far as they have removed the hyena tradition, but the teachings that are contained in these initiations are still very androcentric. I want to look at another aspect in Malawi culture, which brings GBV, and that is the issue of church teachings and practices in Malawi. Churches have traditions. They have some teachings. There may be secret teachings or practices, but there are teachings that promote GBV. For example, there is the Febe tradition being practiced in the Baptist Church. I'm a member of that Baptist church, and I have research on that. Visiting pastors sleep at one church in the name of evangelism. Women cook for them and serve them food. But in addition, the arrangement is made in certain cases that women should have relations with them. This issue of Febe tradition was also recorded by Flata Moyo in her research. And then we have this issue of polygamy. We know that in Malawi churches, there are certain churches which allow polygamy. And this begins from the early 1920s. 1926, a church, the last Church of God and His Christ was started, and it became one of the churches that promoted polygamy. And another church is the African Abraham Church, which started in 1928 as the African National Churches. And we also have the Apostolic Mazowi Church and a few of the Zionist churches which practice polygamy. And the issue is, how does polygamy relate to GBV? Of course, there is a theory that those churches which endorse polygamy, they teach their members how to live justly with their families and wives. But however, injustices seem to be still very prominent in these families. Polygamous families also are victimized by husbands. In the case of a husband becoming converted, this is in relation to churches which does not promote GBV. Because for these churches, if one is polygamous, the condition for him to become full member of the church and to show repentance, they are supposed to reject other wives and children and stick to their first wives. And the result is that the other wives suffer emotional distress and also economic distress, because often they are abandoned by such husband. My argument is that pastoral theology that provides healing should be promoted for such repentant, reformed, polygamous men. The other issue that I have seen in the church is carelessness in dealing with vulnerable groups of people within the church. And examples of vulnerable people are single women who are single because they are either divorced or widowed, and some of them are single from birth. Injustices by the church to these women is done especially through careless sermons. I remember when I was widowed, there was a preacher this one day who emphasized the passage of it is not right for one to be alone, but he must marry. And I realized that he was actually insinuating that I was sinning because I did not get married. Unfortunately, not all women who are widowed or divorced have the opportunity to remarry, and some, even if the opportunities arise, they may not want to get married for other reasons. Another area where I saw I experienced victimization was the way instructions, marriage instructions were organized at women's meetings. It was assumed that all women of all marital status must be part and parcel of these women's conferences. And there were detailed teachings on how to please a husband and the like. And this is the time when I really felt the pain of losing my husband, because whatever they taught only reminded my situation as a widow. And this is what revolutionized the program in our Baptist church, and we introduced a singles program to take place parallel to such initiation programs. There are instances of churches reducing instances of GBV through economic empowerment programs. Some are involved in partnership programs with the church. But now I have very little time, and I want to conclude by the fact that in as much as there are all of these initiatives, theological institutions have a role to play by including gender issues in their theological curriculum. The issue of having responsive gender programs in Marawi or in Africa started in the early 1990s as a goal for the SECO, because the SECO sought to bridge a gap in academic theological literature, which excluded women's issues. And based on this, they were committed to creating responsive programs. Here in Malawi, at one time, we had Musa Dube, who was a consultant and spearheaded such kind of responsive programs, but really in relation to HIV and AIDS and women. And we also had a commission specifically centering on having a gender audit in theological institutions. But even if there has been these attempts, nothing visible has taken place in Malawi. Currently, there is the Agenda 2030, and the SECO is also flagging this program, which includes 17 thematic areas where Malawi and other countries can cooperate in research and publications. I am yet to see how far we are going to make our contribution to that. I would like to talk about what Mzuzu University has done in terms of creating a gender-responsive curriculum reform. At Mzuzu University, there are now courses which have been introduced into the departmental curriculum, and these are four courses named Religion and Feminist Theology, African Feminist Theology, African Feminist Theology and Gender Justice, and African Feminist Theology and Development. To show that these courses are there to stay, even now when I'm on sabbatical, because I'm the one who designed these courses and taught them for a long time. Member of staff, my former student, is teaching these courses at the moment. However, at a departmental level, we are also committed to mainstreaming gender content within available courses, traditional courses. For example, the New Testament, Old Testament course, systematic theology, church history, and so on, African theology, pastoral theology, counseling. We are committed to mainstreaming gender content in these courses. And the fact that there is research generated by students who have not even been my students in my gender class, I know that faculty members are really taking gender research and teaching very seriously. And I think for many theological institutions, the latter approach might be the most visible ones, because in many cases, institutions already have a programmed curriculum with courses which have to finish at a specified time, and it may be difficult to deploy other courses. So I think mainstreaming courses into available subjects might be the way to go. But those who want to introduce new courses, I would say that you do not have to reinvent the wheel. There is enough content material which has been produced and experimented on by the Mzuzu University, and we are available to coordinate with you. And lastly, I would like to look at the gender policy and how it can be applied to other theological institutions. But I will base my dialogue based on Zomba Theological College, because you must also be aware that I was briefly for 18 months a student at Zomba Theological College. And during my time, there were rumors of gender-based violences, such as unwanted companionships between learners and staff, although there was no evidence of such occurrences, but there were disturbing rumors. And you know, Malawians are very good at making rumors as facts. And now, at that time, there were only students and students of theology and their families staying on campus. But now I don't know how the environment is. It may have been more. It must have become more complex now. I know at one time the houses were even rented out to other people who were not theological students or theological staff. And this already makes the gender policy to be more urgent in an environment like this. And what I would say, as you have heard from Professor Ken Ross, I am available to help if there is need for the gender policy, because it is only if you have gender policies that you'll be able to have a benchmark on which to pin people if in case they are involved in gender-based violence during the business of the delivery of the institution. Without having well-trained staff, especially at postgraduate level, even if you have a gender-responsive curriculum, you will not achieve anything, because the courses have to be delivered by qualified people. Unfortunately, in these days, there are many theologians who are willing to continue with their education, but they have discontinued their education because there are no scholarships. In our time, we were in the environment where we could access scholarships through World Council of Churches. I know Fulata, myself, Isabel. I don't know whether Dr. Gertrude Kapuma also has benefited from that. But in our days, scholarships were not very difficult to get. But now the people who used to support such initiatives are not there, and I can only see doom to the progress of delivering a vibrant gender-responsive curriculum. I thank you all for listening. Thank you.